Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. Really excited you could join us today. I'm Russell Warren, I'm Chief Customer Officer at Cascade, and I'll be taking you through the presentation today. Kevin Durman, our CEO, won't be joining us for this session because this is actually a re-recording which we have done due to having some audio problems with the original recording. Just a little bit about us. We are a standard partner. Its name has changed to become a select partner, but we are focused exclusively on AWS. So we help businesses take advantage of AWS technologies, whether that's for saving costs, for getting stability, better performance, or taking advantage of new technologies to create some sort of competitive advantage or into new markets, whatever the business strategy may be. You'll see down the bottom here that we have a number of certifications. So we have both professional and associate level certifications across architecture, development, and sysops administrator, and a slightly odd colored one which stands out from the rest because it's not directly related to AWS, or it's not from AWS directly, but rather is a cloud health certification. So we are a certified partner for the cloud health platform. Both Kevin and ourselves have been in IT for more than 20 years, and I'm telling you that not because it gives my age away, but because we really can see a very strong repeat of, I guess, the early 90s or mid 90s, when technology such as the PC networking and the internet wave was really changing the way companies started to do business, and there was a massive effect of technology, and we're seeing that again, probably at a greater scale. In fact, not probably, but certainly at a greater scale, and it's a wonderful time, I think, for companies to be taking advantage of technology in their businesses. Right, so just quickly, what kind of business are you? Are you a small or a medium-sized business? Well, we firstly will exclude the likes of the enterprise businesses. And how do you know if you're an enterprise? Well, typically you don't have multiple IT teams and multiple lines of reporting and lots of sprawl all over the place. Big banks, insurers, big retailers, etc., etc. Those typically fit the enterprise category. But are you a small or medium-sized business? That's often open to interpretation. We typically would say that a small business would be around 10, perhaps 20 workloads, move towards a medium-sized business all the way up to possibly about 50 workloads, but even more. You might have 200 workloads and classify yourself as a medium-sized business, depending on what those workloads look like. So we'll let you decide exactly what size business that you are. We will tell you, though, that hyperscale we can be a little bit more certain about. And here is a Gartner or a graph from Gartner, or what they call the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is just an assessment of the ability of cloud providers. And this is infrastructure as a service. So it's a measure of the ability to execute versus the just how good their vision is and their strategy is. And as you can see, there's 6 companies on here, right? So this is the last one that came out in 2018. There's no local companies on here. You're really dealing with the mammoth international global providers of infrastructure as a service. The big 3, as they're known: AWS, Microsoft, and Google. Alibaba coming out of the east and certainly doing very well there and growing in some other regions, and then Oracle and IBM also considered what's typically known as hyperscalers. So just to give you some idea of what we mean by hyperscale, so what's a large provider. So Amazon, as an example, will have 60 availability zones in more than 20 countries. There's 12 more coming, including Cape Town, so South Africa about to be on the map in 2020. An availability zone is really a collection of data centers, whatever it takes to provide about 100 to 150,000 servers in a particular location. There's always 3 of them in a geography. That's the latest rule. Sometimes you used to get 2, but now there's a minimum of 3. And that's a lot of service, it's a lot of power, it's a lot of investment. So this is out of the reach of many companies, and that's really why, if you go back and look at previous definitions of, or if you look at previous companies that were on the Gartner Quadrant, you'll see they've dropped off. I mean, it's kind of like the lead group of the peloton breaking away and just having gone so far ahead that just no one can catch them up. If you add to that, as an example, on Amazon, the breadth of features, you get a good picture of, there's 160 odd services available on the Amazon cloud. Now, this is distinct services, so it's really massive. And then just lastly, since we've spoken about AWS quite a bit already, I really enjoy this quote. Have a read. I think it describes AWS quite nicely. Right, let's start off with the basic benefits. I'll break them down into 3 areas. Why am I calling them basic benefits? Well, we believe this is the bare minimum that you should be going for. We actually believe that the real benefit sits elsewhere, but we're going to go through these because a lot of companies do start with a need that fits in one of these areas. I was going to try and do this all in one breath, but I'm sure you can imagine that's pretty much impossible, so I'm going to give up that challenge. But if you have a look at what we'd call always-on infrastructure, one of them is that AWS can provide really stable infrastructure compared to many of the other options that may be available to you. So if you think about that operational and technical leadership that I spoke about, they have 13 years experience of providing just cloud services and infrastructure as a service at scale. They actually run more Windows workloads than Microsoft and have been doing it for longer. If you can think about all of those availability zones with all those services running, they actually haven't lost a whole data center. So they've never seen a whole data center go down, even though, yes, there have been services that have gone down and they've affected many companies because so many companies use them. They give you the ability to plan for failure, and if you just think about having a number of data centers available to you, you can start to take advantage of that to say, well, what happens if I do get a failure in one? It really does start there. So there's also a great deal of automation that happens. Werner Vogels, the CTO of Amazon, I guess famously said there's no compression algorithm for experience, and they apply that experience to create automation and then eliminate the error-prone manual processes in a lot of what they do. Then, of course, I mentioned that they provide services to more than 1 million customers around the globe. In order to do so, they have done a great deal of customization on what they provide, everything from customized hardware, managing their own connectivity, even managing the switching gear for the power substations that power the data centers, just to make sure that they know how to isolate faults. So we're talking about just an incredible infrastructure, and one that is extremely stable. In fact, SLAs are offered on a lot of the services because they can guarantee such stability. Another reason that should be always on is because you're able to scale and group resources a lot easier. I'll just give an example of a load balancer. Load balancers are actually free, by the way. You just pay for the traffic that goes through them. And you could put servers behind these load balancers and choose to distribute the load to them. But you could just as well have a few servers behind those load balancers and run health checks continually on them, so that if there is an availability problem or a performance problem that is not meeting a required threshold that you set, you're able to just re-provision those resources automatically. You don't even have to get involved. If you do, however, want to get involved, the recovery is quick. So another example, you can take snapshots of your workloads. In order to recover that snapshot, it's literally right-clicking and choosing to start it up again, perhaps on a slightly different instance size or type or whatever the case may be. But the gist of it is that you can do that so quickly and so easily, and I think most companies would say it's not going to happen that quickly in their current solution, whether that's on-premise or hosted at some sort of provider. And you can take that all the way up to some sort of DR pilot light type solution where you run the bare minimum of resources so that you can have a live failover, or you can choose just to have certain resources with a live failover backend. A great example of that is RDS. It's a fully managed SQL database or relational database. It runs across 2 availability zones, which is something that until quite recently was unique to AWS, meaning that you could have 2 databases in regions that were, maybe 100 kilometers apart, on different, floodplains and fault lines, and with, different power sources, and you could have live failover between those, and it's literally the click of a button during setup. So let's just look at performance. we talk about elasticity a lot in the cloud world, and basically all that means is that you're able to choose what you want for your needs, when you want it, and you can grow that up and you can shrink it back down again as you need to. You could also make choices to say, okay, I've chosen a server with a great deal of memory to CPU ratio. It turns out that's not what I'm looking for. I want to go back to more CPU than memory as a ratio. So really a lot of choice, a lot of elasticity. Scalability, very similar, but really in scalability we're talking about the ability to just grow to what's essentially an infinite number of resources, certainly for small and medium-sized businesses. I spoke with an ex-colleague quite recently, and he said to me that often when people try to do a comparison between the likes of AWS and even some quite large traditional, I guess, hosting providers, questions, can you provide me with 10,000 servers, virtual servers for an hour and switch them back off again? And the answer typically is no. Now I know we don't normally need that kind of scalability or that scale in the small and medium sized business, but that creates that essentially infinite availability of resources. So you don't have to worry that you're going to run out of power at any point. Your app's going to need more power, and it's going to be a great deal of effort to get that power through to your app. It's highly scalable. And there's also a number of better and faster technologies which come in the cloud native environment. An example of this is Aurora. There's a really good blog post which I will also put into the show notes, which just explain how Aurora can provide amazing scalability and great performance at a fraction of the cost of the traditional tier 1 providers. And then lastly, there's cost. It's always important, although it's important to think about value as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, in AWS, you run on economies of scale, or you take advantage of the same economies of scale that Amazon have, and they have what they call a virtuous cycle. And if you think about it quite simply, if you order a lot of servers, 100,000, you get to a good price point. You pass that price point on to your customers, the demand increases. That means you go back and buy perhaps another 150,000 servers, which means your price point can improve. Pass that on, stimulates more usage, and of course so the cycle continues. And there are numerous price reduction examples we can give that have happened over the years and continue to happen. You of course only pay for what your current needs are, so you don't have to provision for maximum performance spikes, and you don't have to think about what you need in 3, 4, 5 years. You only pay for what you currently need right now, and a lot of the time the ability to scale up and scale down on those resources is automated, so you don't actually have to do anything. And of course you're not maintaining data centers, you're not maintaining hardware, you're not worrying about whether or not you should have a raised floor, and is the should we have monitoring for water leaks, is the aircon working? There's a million things that you dislike on a daily basis perhaps. And we spoke of course about cloud native services being at a fraction of the cost as well. So let's just chat about TCO for a second. This is often used and often comes up in conversation when people do comparisons of on-premise, hosted, or cloud, and say, well, what's the cheapest place to run it, essentially. So my total cost of ownership, taking all things into account, which might be related, and everybody's got a TCO model they might want to use. TCO is a scenario planning tool. It's not an ultimate truth all the time, so it's always good to bear that in mind. We can have a look at some stats, for examples of just how cloud can bring cost reduction and great TCO, and there's some big numbers in there, and I'm sure lots of big companies, but it's not what I'm wanting to highlight. I think what we're talking about is that whilst these calculations help, I think that if we're focusing only on cost and we're talking about TCO all the time, perhaps that's the wrong reason maybe to look at cloud. I'm saying that a little flippantly, so there's all those basic benefits we spoke about, but really you need to look a little further ahead in your business and say, yes, I want a low cost of ownership, but the way we look at it is to say you want low cost of ownership and you want great TCO figures, but you want them for the stuff that's basically not bringing value to your business. So it's something that we term technical debt. So how do you keep the technical debt? So just keeping the lights on. What are those basic functions that IT delivers to the business? How do I do that for as little as possible, but make it as reliable as possible? And then how do we shift our mindset to building value for your business? So this is not a buzzword value. Every salesperson has always said, we're value added something, or we want you to pay for value. It's an overused term. So I'm going to be a little bit more precise about it. So what do I mean when I talk about value that the cloud can bring to small and medium-sized businesses? So there are a number of things that we could talk about. I've decided to focus just on two that I think are the real benefits of cloud for a lot of businesses. The first one is around unlocking innovation. Often when you say innovation to companies, they don't think they're in a space that requires innovation. Maybe it's tried and tested stuff. Maybe you can't get a ship to go any faster from port to port by innovating it. But there are a lot of areas where you can test, and the key to the cloud is that you can test it quickly. So you can get access to what you need from a technology point of view basically instantly. If there's something you want to try, you can fail very quickly at that. And it's a weird way to put it, is to say fail fast. But in reality, if you're going down the wrong route, you want to find out quickly, and so that you can say, put a stop to that project. It's time to move on to something else. It was a great idea, didn't work. Those decisions aren't capital intensive because we're talking about an OPEX model. So you're only paying for what you use, and you pay for it when you use it. Pay on a monthly basis essentially, but can be priced right down to the second. And then there's something that I call push button rocket science. So we'll touch on this a little bit more and look at some examples. But what we're saying here is that businesses have access to some really, really high-end technology that's made available to them as a service. So you don't have to worry about what's going on the back end and all the amazing neural networks and the thousands of processes and all these fantastic technical wizardry that is often the case. You don't have to understand that. You don't have to dig down into it to take advantage. And I'm going to give you two examples to show you exactly what I mean by that. And then, of course, there's a great deal of value sitting in your data. Things like machine learning and certainly business analytics and business intelligence require data that is often sitting on site, or it's difficult to access, or it's all over the place. The cloud makes it a lot easier to unlock the value from your data. It's sitting close to the computing resources. You're able to put these push button rocket science that I spoke about. You're able to use those technologies to analyze that data, and really you can unlock that value a lot quicker. When it comes to business agility, really it's about responding rapidly. People talk about disruption a lot, perhaps a little bit overused in many cases, and in fact misused in many cases. And businesses that are smaller are inherently more agile than larger businesses, so you can respond rapidly. Your technology should do the same. In reality, you should be a disruptor and not be the disrupted one. We will, in a future webinar, in fact I think it's the next webinar, be talking about how susceptible your particular business or industry may be to disruption based on research done by Harvard Business Review. So let's have a quick look at two examples of solutions that we've produced for clients that are really only possible due to cloud and due to the services made available on AWS. So the first one is a flash briefing. So if you own an Echo Dot device or any Alexa powered device, you'll know that you can say, Alexa, what is my flash briefing? And Alexa will return whatever news you've subscribed to. That's sometimes just audio, and sometimes is artificial intelligence and text to speech that will bring you those updates. We have worked with a media and news site to develop a flash briefing for them. It uses a pre-built Alexa skill. This is something that if you're familiar with the technology, it's actually It's not a great deal of work, basically, right? But it does require some familiarity with things like a console and some technical terms. But of course, that's why partners exist to help with that. But if you think about it, in the past, this would have required a team of almost scientists training these models and requiring massive computing power in order to make them work, and use things like natural language processing to understand the intent of the questions, and to search for the data and return the data correctly, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of things behind that. This is available really in a number of screens of setup, which is massive. So why would a company want to use a flash briefing? Well, if you want to reach more customers with your message and perhaps pull them into your website or pull them into a premium service, a flash briefing would be a great way to do it. Similarly, there's a service which is facial recognition as well as actually object recognition and scene recognition, whether in static photos or videos, which is called Amazon Recognition. A really powerful service, same kind of idea, a huge amount of processing power and training and data that's had to go to develop this service. And what we've done with Cascade Visual Cognition is we've used recognition and built it into a slightly larger solution, and that's used by companies, for example, to facilitate meeting a guest at reception. So for example, you will walk up, you will push the button on a tablet, really it can be a low-cost device, that your face will be scanned. If you are not recognized or not known, it'll ask you for some details, who you want to see, and then that person is notified that you're at reception, or perhaps the receptionist is just notified of your name and who you're there to see, and the process can go a lot quicker. Similarly with events companies and registration, you may have hundreds, perhaps thousands of people coming through and you need to process them quickly. This is a great way to do pre-processing. Important to note, because there's a lot of sensitivity around personal data, that this doesn't store images of people's faces. It stores the metadata and the measurements around those faces. So really, this is just two examples, and we've spoken a little bit about how to see technology more as value, and I think that's really the key message. Again, let's talk TCO, let's talk about those basic benefits. Those are important in business, but think about how you could be using technology to build much more in your business than simply keeping the lights on. So just a few more examples just to illustrate how broad the application of a lot of these technologies is. We've started working on a machine learning solution which could help a certain company to pack containers better, right? So how to get the best fit. So if you go and research how logistics companies might have been using this already, because it seems a pretty logical thing to do, you'll see tens of millions of dollars being spent on this. This is available to companies, and all of the companies that I'm citing these examples on are actually small companies. They don't have to pay anywhere near that. I mean, we're talking more in the thousands and perhaps tens of thousands, worst case scenario, to build these kinds of things out. So it's really available for small businesses. Similarly, you could embed text-to-speech technology into all of your articles on your website. That is available almost, in fact, I think actually is as a plugin on your site. Similarly, we're able to provide sentiment analysis dashboards for a PR firm that wants to be able to show their clientele how their customers and target markets are perceiving them on social media platforms, as an example. And then there's another company which really takes care of a pretty straightforward health and safety requirement, but in order to make it more efficient, in order to avoid storing huge numbers of records, we're busy rolling out a blockchain technology, which is a managed service inside AWS, which will preserve the authenticity, obviously, of that chain of handling, and then those documents become auditable. So a couple of frequently asked questions. Security always comes up. Is the cloud secure? Isn't it less secure? There's always stories about someone who's being hacked. The reality is the cloud provides enterprise level security that's simply not accessible for small and medium-sized businesses anywhere else. We can go into a great deal of detail about this, but if you look to provide some sort of certification, or if you need to be compliant with some kind of statute, most companies will find that it's easier to achieve that inside the cloud. Of course, you can't provide no security. You are responsible for security in the cloud, so you still have to take those steps, those diligent steps. So in relation to security, the POPI Act or POPIA often comes up, and normally in relation to data sovereignty. In other words, can I keep my data in the country, or can I keep it outside the country, or am I restricted from doing so? There are very few cases where you're actually restricted from doing so. There's often a somewhat of a misconception about the requirements around data protection. We'll happily provide you with more information on this, but just know that POPIA does not restrict you. It rather provides a governance framework and helps you to make the right decisions and take the right precautions when you are handling people's data, which of course is what we all want as individuals. People often talk about latency as well. The data centers currently are sitting in the UK. Those are the closest ones. Our answer to that: test it. That's the most important thing. We recently helped a client with their application. We moved it into AWS with them, and they found that their latency and responses from Amazon were actually lower than they were from local providers. So latency is not always a function of distance. It can be a function of other technical things like the number of hops and just how the routing is handled. So there's a bunch of technical reasons behind latency, but again, most important thing: test your application. You might need to do some work. It might not be suitable. Test it. Payment is another one. People don't like putting their credit cards in. Certainly companies don't like putting their credit cards in. Well, that's great. Talk to us. We'll move you to invoice-based billing. It's as simple as that, really. Knowledge is really important. A lot of companies preserve and actually perhaps defend the knowledge that they have. They see it as IP. Our view is that the advent of cloud has forced people to be constantly thinking about innovation if you're a service provider, and constantly thinking about building out what your customer requires, going to your customers with ideas. So we actually believe in sharing knowledge, and I think it's important for anyone on a cloud journey to go and gain as much knowledge as possible. Ask your service provider. They should actually be helping you with that. If not, feel free to go onto YouTube. There's probably a lifetime of information on there, and there's also great information available on AWS website as well. Just a quick announcement: AWS Loft. Just head into your search engine and type up AWS Loft Johannesburg. This is a fantastic event. It's been really successful all around the world in major cities, and essentially you will have access to AWS experts, to more than 150 sessions, a keynote by Werner Vogels, and this will be running for a month, and there's something for everyone in there. So head across to that website, register. You do have to register, and you have to start building out some courses. I recommend you do that quickly, because those places are going to get booked up if it's anything like previous events. And then it's the month of February, and we want you to fall in love with your IT all over again. It's one of those things that it's easy to fall out of love with, right? It can drive you nuts rather than make you feel like your day's got better. So we're inviting you on a date. Come and have coffee with us. Ask us whatever you want to ask us. We're a web call away. Welcome to come through. We'll come and see you. But let's talk about IT and how we can help you fall in love with it all over again. So thank you once again for joining us. We really do value your time. We would appreciate your feedback. If there's information that you would like to see in these webinars, in this webinar series, if there's questions that you have, if there's guidance or advice, there's things that you don't like about the webinar, we will take it all. These are meant to be very good information for you. It's meant to be good content. We want to give you what you want, so let us know what that is, and we will go and research it and bring it to you in this webinar series. Feel free to go across to www.cascade.cloud as well for all of our contact details, and we will see you on the next webinar.